Okay, good morning. We're continuing with our learning of the Aruch Hashulchan. We're at the beginning of Orach Chaim, Siman Aleph, Sif Dalet. And he's continuing with his long introduction. He goes on for 17 Seifim before he ever gets to the Shivisi Hashem Lenegdi Summit, which the Ramah opens up with in Shulchan Aruch. But background, fundamentals, in this sense, the Aruch Hashulchan is really kind of mirroring the model of the Rambam, although the Aruch Hashulchan's whole approach in creating a restatement of halacha is very much the opposite of the Rambam's approach. He's not interested here in giving you black and white rules. He's interested in bringing you into the give and take, the masu, matan, the shaklavataria, the underlying dynamics that play out behind reaching a final conclusion about what to do and how to practice. And he's trying to give you a look under the hood of halacha, so to speak. So he's very, very different from the Rambam's Mishnah Torah in general. But like the Rambam's Mishnah Torah, he begins here with this long introduction that is really fundamentals, important fundamentals background that is really important, similar to the Rambam's Hilchos Yisodei HaTorah, that are important to engage with before ever getting to actual halacha. Halacha is something that's built on, it's a mistake. I think we can take away from what he's doing here, and really from what the Rambam did as well. It's a mistake to think that halacha exists in a vacuum and it can just be done. There's a purpose to it. There's a background to it. This is really the first Rashi in Bereshis, the first Rashi in the Torah. Before we ever get to the first mitzvah, Chodesh Hazeh Lachem, the Torah has to give us a background. It gives us an ethos. It gives us a purpose. It gives us a larger story, a larger picture that helps us contextualize and understand what it is we are doing and what it is that we're supposed to be accomplishing, what it is that we're supposed to be experiencing through halacha, which the Zohar refers to as Taryag Itim, 613 pathways or bits of advice to experience Dveikus and achieve the Matara Ha'achrona, the ultimate goals of Torah, that can only be achieved if we understand what those backgrounds are. And so we continue in Sif Dalet. He says, V'chol bar das, yesh lo lahavin. Everybody has to understand. Kemo she'im nira melech basar v'dam bona binyan yakar hamurchav mishnei hafachim. Just as if we encountered a human king who built a beautiful palace that was composed of two opposite parts. Shebana b'socha avanim yakaros shoham v'yishve v'chol even yakara. On the one hand, it's built with beautiful, hewn, smooth, shaped stones. V'gam metit v'afar. But those stones, of course, are held together with cement and mortar. Hayala ala das shetachlis kavanas hamelech hu l'shem hatit v'afar. Could it possibly occur to you that the purpose of the palace and the king's goal was to display and engage with and live within tit and afar, within mortar and cement and dirt and mud? Ubevadai, certainly hatachlis shel habinyan heim ha'avanim hayikaros v'hatit v'afar einam ela lechizuk habinyan. Certainly, the whole purpose of the building that the king is constructing, the whole reality that the Melech Malchei HaMelachim has constructed, which, as the Aruch Hashulchan discussed in the first three Seifim, is inevitably, and particularly the human being, is inevitably composed of two parts, Guf and Neshama, a spiritual aspect and a physical aspect, a part of us that's connected directly to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and a part of us that pulls us down and leaves us wanting and needing and insecure, the nefesh bahamis, that is a drive for self-preservation, as opposed to the nefesh elokus, which is really something that drives us to transcend our physical limits and reconnect to something much, much bigger, where there's no need for self-preservation because everything is exactly fine the way it is. Things are composed of these two parts: the Even Yakaros, Avanim Yakaros, and Yakarim, and the Tit and Afar. And the Tit and Afar is there, Lechizuk Habinyan, he says. Hatit va'afar einam ela lechizuk habinyan. They're not there as the purpose of the binyan, the purpose of the palace, but they are nevertheless very important. They're there to strengthen the palace. If you created a palace, if you create a binyan, if you create a reality that's composed purely of avanim yikarim and beauty and goodness and refinedness and godliness, it's not going to hold together to achieve what the Melech Malchei Malachim is trying to accomplish. It also has to be held together by tit and afar. This is the idea, of course, that we only appreciate goodness against negativity and against hardship. This is the idea that we find at the beginning of Chaim, where the Arizal tells us that, of course, before everything, there's an Ar Ein Sof HaPashat HaMamale Kol Metzias, where everything was just HaKadosh Baruch Hu, so to speak. And nevertheless, HaKadosh Baruch Hu comes in and creates the tit and the afar that sort of takes away some of those, some of that beauty, and leaves us with tit and afar, with negativity, with coarseness, with physicality, with materiality. But that's all there in order to appreciate the Ar Ein Sof that was there in the first place, which couldn't be appreciated because there was no contrast. There was nothing to see it against. There was no way to define it or grasp it, because we can only define and grasp things in relief against something else. And likewise is the case with the human being, which is what the Aruch Hashulchan here is particularly referring to. The human being is composed of these two parts he told us earlier. It's composed of neshama and guf, and the guf is coarse, and the guf is from a spiritual perspective, the guf is not ideal. It's selfish, it's needy, it's insecure, it's all a ratzon l'kabel. It's the opposite of godliness, mikatza el katza. As far as you could possibly imagine, shinui hatsura, a change in the essence, and change in what HaKadosh Baruch Hu is, that's what a guf is. That's what a creation is. Nevertheless, he says, that part of us plays a very important role, and it's a mistake to focus on that part as the end-all and be-all of everything. The Baal HaSulam talks about this in his Hakdama to the Zohar, which I just want to give a plug. It's going to be coming out from Koren at some point soon. There's a beautiful, beautiful translation of the Baal HaSulam's Hakdama to the Zohar that will, Emeretz Hashem, be coming out at some point, sponsored and supported by Share, a new initiative for helping spread Penimei HaTorah. And the Baal HaSulam sort of goes into the fact and discusses the fact that, like, human beings are, and human beings' existence in the world is in many ways negative. We're full of deficiencies. We're full of errors and mistakes and problems. Our experience in the world is full of errors and mistakes and problems. But he points out to us, of course, that it's an error to focus exclusively on those things. It's a mistake to think that the perfect creator, the chok hatov lahetiv, the absolute goodness, creates a reality in which our experience of that reality is negative and deficient and painful and hard, and that must be the purpose of things. It can't be. Like the Gemara says, like the famous Gemara where Rav Elazar ben Rav Shimon meets this ugly person on the road, and he says, "Oh my gosh, you're so ugly." And the person says to him, "Don't complain to me, complain to the person who made me. Complain to the Uman, complain to the craftsman. You don't complain. There's a purpose behind everything that's done. And if there's a problem with something, then you have to look at the intent behind the problem. And if there's a combination of guf and neshama in the experience of the human being, which, as the Aruch Hashulchan told us before, leaves us in a state of milchama, of constant tension, constant inner conflict between those two aspects of ourselves, there's a purpose to that. And both sides of that play an important role in achieving that purpose. Kamokain, Melech Malchei Hamlachim HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Likewise, HaKadosh Baruch Hu Shebara Es Ha'adam Murchav Min Neshama Tahora Shehi Chelek Elokam Imal. Likewise, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, who created the human being composed of both a neshama tahora. That neshama tahora is always tahar, like Rabbi Nachman says. There's always something in it. If you're identifying a place within yourself that is not tahora, that's not the neshama. You're identifying something extrinsic to the neshama. The neshama is tahor. It's a chelek elokam imal. You can't do anything to it. You can't mess it up. You can't ruin it. It is what it is. Ani Hashem lo shanisi. There's nothing you can do to change that part of yourself. Any part of yourself you identify a problem in, that's the guf, that's the chomer, that's the tit and the afar. That's not the essential neshama, and you have to go deeper to find that nekuda tova. In any case, Hashem created the human being composed of a guf, composed of a neshama, chelek elokam imal, v'hi tashuv el ha'elokim acharei mo. So, and that part returns to HaKadosh Baruch Hu after our physical existence ends, because it's eternal. V'gam meguf av, and we're also composed of a coarse body. Shehu titva afar. This is cement. This is mortar. Could you possibly imagine that the purpose of that is the tit and the afar? Anyone who could think that the non-essentiality, that the badness, that the negativity, that the physicality is the purpose of the thing that was created by the Hakol Yachol and the absolute goodness that exists, HaKadosh Baruch Hu, it can't be. It can't be. They have to be crazy to think that. V'zehu she'amar Avakya Ben Mahalalel. This is what Avakya Ben Mahalalel says in the first mission of the third parak of Pirkei Avos. Histakel begimel devarim ve'ein ata bali de avera. Histakel, reflect, meditate, think about these three things, and you will never come to an avera. Lo ve'ein ata bali de avera. You won't come to the hands of avera. The Arizal himself writes about this, or actually Rav Chaim Vital writes about this in Shar in Shari Kedusha. The Rav Chaim Vital writes about this. He says, "Ve'eno bali de avera." It doesn't say you won't do averas. It says you won't come close to averas. What does it mean? It means that you won't activate the yezter. Focus on these three things, and you won't activate the yezter. Forget doing averas. You can have a yezter and white knuckle it and control it and stamp down that physical aspect of yourself and never do the avera. But the yezter is there. Avakya Ben Mahalalel is pushing you further, Rav Chaim Vital says, and he's giving us a recipe for never even activating the yezter in the first place. And what are these three things? Da ma'ein ba'asa. Think about or understand, appreciate where you come from. Ula'an ata holech, and appreciate where you're going, where you will go, and before whom you're going to give din v'cheshbon. And he explains as well at the same time that where do you come from? You come metipa serucha, from a putrid drop of semen combining with an egg that is a nothing and turns into a human being. Think about where you're going to become worms, and who are you going to give din v'cheshbon to? Lifnei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Melech Malchei Hamlachim. Medrash Shmuel points out, and this is a fascinating point, he says, actually, Avakya Ben Mahalalel is making two different points here. He's speaking to two different parts of ourselves, which fits in very nicely with what the Orach Hashulchan seems to be trying to say here. On the one hand, he's saying something very high, very positive. He's speaking to the neshama. And on the other hand, he's saying something coarse and negative and physical. And in that sense, he's speaking to the guf. Me'ein ata ba'asa, la'an ata holech. Reflect on where you come from and where you're going, which is actually just the same thing. HaKadosh Baruch Hu Melech Malchei Hamlachim. It's just HaKadosh Baruch Hu. We come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, Chelek Elokam Imal, speaking to the neshama. We come from HaKadosh Baruch Hu, and we're going back to HaKadosh Baruch Hu, we're not actually any different and separate from that the entire time we're here. And reflecting on that, there's no room, he says, for the yetzer to be activated, because the whole idea of the yetzer and the whole thing that brings you lidei avera, the yetzer itself, is a sense of distance and disconnect from HaKadosh Baruch Hu. A sense of distance and disconnect from the reality of Eino Movado, Malek Halaretz Kevodo, that HaKadosh Baruch Hu is both Soviv Kol Almin and Mamalek Kol Almin. Being disconnected from that idea creates a sense of ego and a sense of self and a sense of insecurity. It activates the nefesh bahamis, it activates the guf, it activates the tit va'afar within us. And those parts of us need things and feel like they're missing something. Because they don't live in the reality that you're not missing anything, because asali kol tsarki, everything is fine, I have everything I need, and whatever I have is what I need, and whatever I need is what I have. So to reflect deeply on the idea of me'ena tabasa and la'an ata holech, which is just HaKadosh Baruch Hu, that leaves you connected to HaKadosh Baruch Hu on a constant basis, because that's what you really are. And at the same time, he says, you're also speaking to the guf. The guf doesn't respond to those kinds of lofty ideas because the guf is stuck in physicality. The guf is stuck in materiality. You can talk to the guf about lofty spiritual things, but that's not the language that the guf speaks. But when you tell the guf, you come from nothing, mitipas rucha, and you're going to nothing, you're going to dirt and worms. And you're going to have to give din v'cheshbon for anything, meaning there's going to be schar v'onesh and a punishment and an accounting for things, and that's not pleasant. The guf responds to that. The guf can respond to carrots and sticks. That's not the language of the neshama, however. And so he's talking about both of these things, speaking both to the guf and to the neshama. Kolomar, the Aruch Hashulchan says, "Haneshama hi chelek elokam imal v'tashiv limakora." The neshama is a chelek elokam imal, and it's going to return to that place, back to the elokam imal that it came from. Ulahafech haguf me'ein ba'asa mitipas rucha, and the guf, where does it come from? It comes from a tipas rucha. La'anata holech l'makam afar v'rima. On the one hand, the neshama is incredibly, incredibly high and not of this world, and never was of this world, and even while it's here is not of this world, and that means that part of us is not here and not of this world. And on the other hand, the guf is very much of this world, and this world means nothing because it's fleeting, and it comes from nothing and it goes back to nothing. From this we can appreciate that the real goal, the real purpose is our nefesh elokis. That part of us is real. That part of us is eternal. V'lachein kodem kol, and therefore, before everything, therefore, before everything, before we can start talking about halacha, before we can start talking about hashkamas baboker, seder hashkamas baboker, and all of that kind of stuff, and yiskaber kari, and all of the siman aleph, sif aleph of the Shulchan Aruch, before we can start talking about how we act and how we behave, we have to really appreciate, reflect, and understand that the essence is our experience and our reality as a neshama. We're stuck in a guf like the tit and the afar that hold together the binyan yakar that built by the king to make it work and make it function in the way that it's supposed to function. But understanding those things gives us a basis for then entering into halacha. So afterwards, and probably for a little while, we're going to continue working through now several pages of the Aruch Hashulchan's attempting to provide us with a framework for the Yesodei Torasenu, that from which then we can get into a proper orientation and perspective and contextualization to begin working through the actual halacha.